Good to see you. I was just thinking about this message today, and we're in a series on David, and this morning we're going to talk about somebody else, but it's part of David's story. And within that, I just was thinking about how oftentimes I think there can be like a divide, right, between just like, what are we doing here, right? We're here, we're doing church, but there's a platform and there's seats, and sometimes, you know, in most of our traditional understanding of how this goes, this is like there's a teacher or there's somebody who's up here, and they're here to impart knowledge and to tell you things. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is, a lot of times when we come to church and there's a prescriptive nature to what we're talking about, and I say that like a doctor, right? Or like maybe not even a doctor, maybe like a mom or a dad, you know, like when your kid is sick or when you were a kid and you were sick and they were like, you know, this is what I think you need to do. Take this medicine, or go lay down. Or my mom had this blue book that she would get out, and it was like a book of like ancient healing prayers, you know, from the early church, or I don't know where she got this book, but I remember that if I was faking it, that book cured me really fast, you know, because you're like, I was sick today because I wanted to stay home from school, not because I wanted you to sit over me and pray over me with the blue book for the last 2.5 hours. You know what I mean? So, it cured that really quick. But, when I think about this and the relationship that we have as a pastor, as a congregation, you know, one thing that gets lost sometimes is that while there may be things here that are like prescriptive, that's like, hey, this would be healthy for us all to take part in, or, you know, this is something that would be healing for our souls. This is something that we ought to participate with. It's not sort of like coming from a place of well, I'm a professional and let me tell you what you need to do. It's much more coming from a place of partaking, right? Because the real healer, the real physician is Jesus. It's not me, a pastor. It's not, you know, because I'm on stage that somehow this is something medicine that I don't need to take, but you need to take. And I just want to say that today because today is something that I think all of us will experience in our life. It's something that I think every one of us is walking in a space where it's always sort of an ever-present, I don't know, danger's not the right word, but it's always there. And for me too. And so as I preach this, I just hope you hear, this is medicine that I need to take, that I'm taking, that I'm constantly like this. I have to be receiving this from Jesus myself. And we're going to talk about a character today called Michal. And just to give you like a preview, Michal was one of David's wives. Yes, you heard me right. One of David's wives, because he had a few. But Michal sort of has this climax of her story in Scripture. There's a lot we don't know about Michal. She appears a few times before this moment that we're going to look at today, and we're going to look at those too. But Michal, you know, her climactic moment is kind of a tragic one. It's kind of one that we look at as a cautionary tale. And I hope today that as we look at it, what I want to bring, I want to bring more to Michal than just that moment. And so, stick with me. We're going to do a little bit of like going back in the story and then coming back to where we're at in the story. But if you've been with us, you know that last week was the week where we looked at, kind of ended with the death of Saul. Saul was the first king of Israel. David, you know, when God sort of removed his hand of anointing from Saul, David was the one chosen to replace him. But David's been on this unorthodox journey, right? He didn't just step into the palace because God anointed him. In fact, to the contrary, he ends up, you know, running and hiding because Saul is jealous and wants to kill him, and David becomes an outlaw. He actually tries to go to battle with the enemies of Israel, with the Philistines, and the Philistine commanders have to be like, David, you can't can't come to fight your people with us, because that would be really conflicting for you, and you might actually choose to switch teams in the middle of it, and we don't want that. So they wouldn't let him do it, but he tried. And so with Saul dead, you would think now's the moment, right? David was anointed. We're waiting for him to have his shot, and finally Saul's out of the way. But that's not really exactly what happens. So what really happens is much more of like a kind of a Game of Thrones thing, which I've never watched Game of Thrones. So if you're a big Game of Thrones fan, this is what I imagine Game of Thrones would be like. And if I'm wrong, you can tell me afterward and yell at me, because I'm sure you're really passionate about it. But so basically, one of Saul's sons was still alive. So Jonathan was killed on the battlefield with Saul. One of his sons is still alive, and Saul's general decides to make that son the king. His name was Ishbosheth. And so they make him the new king. But at the same time, there's some of the people of Israel, that the people from the tribe of Judah, that sort of come to David, and they're like, we know you were anointed, so we actually want you to be king. And so what happens is it kind of creates these two kingdoms where there was one kingdom before. You have the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. And David sort of sets up at Hebron, and that's where he becomes his capital city. And then Ishbosheth has a capital city somewhere else. And it goes on like this, and there's some sort of you think about this, it's almost like a civil war, and there's some battles that happen and some things, and it's tough stuff. When you read it, you can see these guys were on the same team, and now they're not on the same team. They were friends, and they know each other, and they're like, it's complicated. And so what ends up happening is that Ishbosheth, his commander, the one that made him king, ends up defecting to David. But because Ishbosheth's commander had killed one of David's commander's brothers, that guy's out for revenge, and so he kills that guy. And it kind of creates this situation where now Ishbosheth has no general. It feels like I have something in my mouth every time I say that. It's like, okay. But he has no general. And so, of course, he sort of loses his nerve a little bit. There's a kind of a tragic moment. He ends up being murdered. And as we sort of come to this, we're not quite there yet, but there's this one little moment, right? And it's the moment when Ishbosheth's general sort of switched teams, or tried to. And David is looking at this guy, and he's like, I don't really trust you, but in order for me to trust you, I need you to do something for me. I need you to bring me Michal, my wife, who is Saul's daughter. Now, this opens up a whole other can of worms, right? Because even though we touched on this, we didn't really talk about it. If you remember, when David killed Goliath, Saul was promising that he would give his daughter in marriage to whoever killed Goliath. And this is like a little bit jarring for us, I think. I think we feel a little bit like this is uncomfortable. We don't usually, we're not arranged marriage culture, and then on top of that, to use your daughter kind of like a political token. But it was fairly normal in this time for this to happen, especially among royalty. And so he offers to give his daughter, and actually he had an older daughter, and David was like super humble, and he's like, why should I become the king's son-in-law? I'm just nobody. And so Saul gives that daughter to somebody else. And we're going to come to that in a minute, but I want to read this part where David has requested that this commander bring Michal, his wife, because when David ran from Saul, became an outlaw, he left her behind. And so they've been estranged for this entire time while David was away, trying to escape Saul. And this is how it reads when in 2 Samuel chapter 3. It says, so David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, saying, give me my wife, Michal. Now, if we were going to pronounce that correctly, it'd probably be something more like Michal, but because I'm struggling with names already, I'm just going to call her Michal. Give me Michal, to whom I was betrothed for 100 foreskins of the Philistines. Ishbosheth sent men and had her taken from her husband. And here we see this detail that while David has been off hiding and running and living with the Philistines and being an outlaw, that she's actually been remarried to another man, a man named Paltiel. And so Ishbosheth sent men and had her taken from her husband, from Paltiel, the son of Laish. And her husband went with her, weeping as he went. I want you to imagine this scene for a moment. She's been remarried, and there's obviously some affection between them. And now the king, her brother, just sends men to rip her away from her new life, to haul her back to give her to David. And there's this detail here that her husband went with her weeping as he went, following her as far as Bahurim. Now the assumption is that this detail tells us that he followed until basically like the last stop before they got to David. The entire time weeping as he went. And then Abner said to him, "Go, return." Basically says like, get out of here. This is done. It's a done deal. All your tears is not going to fix this. And so he returned. And I share this little story just to show you a little glimpse of Michal's life. That she's been used as a political pawn. But at least in this moment, it looks like she's being taken from something that she genuinely loved. There's no way to feel about it except for that this feels kind of brutal. She had no choice in the matter. And honestly, as we've studied David together, it struck me how brutal things were back then. You know, we've had verses that pop up here and there, and some of the sub-stories we haven't read together, but, you know, things where like, oh yeah, then that guy killed like 800 people. Or even David talking about, you know, having to not only kill Goliath, but then have to go kill 100 Philistines to prove to Saul that he, was worthy of being his son-in-law. And it kind of makes us, I guess, appreciate the reality of how difficult some of this would have been. But there's other verses that tell us more about David and Michal's marriage. And I want to share these because I think it shows us how things change throughout this story. And so when David found out that, he kind of rejected Saul's first offer of being his son-in-law, there's this verse that comes after that, and it says that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David. And when they informed Saul, the thing was pleasing to him. Now you would think as a father, Saul would be like, hey, she loves this guy. He's doing a great job. We could just put them together, be a power couple for the kingdom of Israel. But that's not why it pleased him. For Saul thought, I will give her to him so that she may become a trap for him. Anybody have a father-in-law like that? No, I'm kidding. Don't raise your hand. And that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Therefore, Saul said to David, for a second time, you may become my son-in-law today. So he's like, hey, I know you didn't want to do it with the first daughter, but hey, we got another opportunity. And what he says is, that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. The whole point of marrying him to his daughter was that Saul didn't want the guilt of taking David out. And so he's like, if I marry him to my daughter, then I can send him on these dangerous missions, like killing 100 Philistines, and maybe he'll get killed on one of those. And then I'll look like the good guy. Because I was just, a father-in-law. I wanted to bring him into the family, but he just couldn't float it. He got killed trying. Interestingly, David uses this tactic later. But in all of this, Michal is just kind of a political football. And yet she has genuine emotions, genuine love for David. The end of that chapter reads like this: when Saul saw and realized that the Lord was with David, because this is after David successfully kills the Philistines, and now Saul's like, well, I guess I got to make good on this. And that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him, then Saul was even more afraid of David. So Saul was David's enemy continually. It's the second time in Scripture that we're told that Michal loved David. And for Michal, this wasn't just an arranged marriage, full of duty and expectation. It was actually love. Fast forward, and now Ishbosheth is dead. Both kingdoms are united under David. And so this is the first time when David is now king of the entire nation of Israel. And this is sort of like, hey, this is what the prophet prophesied, right? And David wants to bring the Ark of the Covenant back to Jerusalem, to his capital. Now, if you understand the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark of the Covenant was a box, and it had sacred relics that the Israelites kept with them. So there was a jar full of manna, the food that God gave them in the wilderness. There was Aaron's staff that was like a sign when it bloomed. There was the Ten Commandments that were carved in stone, and the Israelites, the Ark of the Covenant was sort of like symbolic for God's presence. And so often you see really interesting stories associated with it. And David wants to bring it to his new capital city of Jerusalem, but it's been gone for over 20 years. Now, it's not lost. There was a point where Israel's like, hey, let's take it with us into war, and then we'll win because we'll have it with us. It's sort of like a good luck charm or whatever. God's presence will be with us, and then we'll definitely win. And that doesn't go so well. They lose. And the Philistines take the Ark of the Covenant. And they had the Ark of the Covenant for a while, but it just caused them all kinds of problems. It was making them sick. It was like wrecking their temples because they would put it in their temple, and then their statues of their gods would like fall over and break in front of it. And so they're like, we don't want this anymore. They put it on a cart, and they put some gold there to be like, hey, it'll be like a peace offering. And then they just kind of like, slap the oxen and like, take it back. And so he does. So the oxen takes it back, and it comes back into Israel. And the first people that get it there are like, oh, they're kind of curious about it. So they offer sacrifices to it, and you don't really know what to do. But then they decide to peek inside, which is a bad choice. So then that causes a plague. And so it moves on to another place, and it stays there. And the Israelites, even though it's their symbol of the presence of God, it's the symbol of like God's favor with them, they're still kind of afraid of it. They're like, we're going to keep that at an arm's length because it's causing all kinds of problems. And there's this moment, even when, because a lot of this happens when the Philistines capture it. It happens before Saul was even king. And there's this moment where when the Philistines capture the ark, it's sort of like one of the lowest days in their history as a people. And when the high priest hears about it, he falls over and dies. And his two sons die too. And one of those sons was named Phineas, and his wife was pregnant. She was about to give birth to a baby. And when she heard that what had happened, and she heard that her son was dead, or her husband was dead, she actually gave birth right away. Like the stress of it caused her to go into labor. And she gives birth to the son, and she names her son Ichabod, which means the glory has departed. Because that's how Israel felt about this moment. That the glory, when the ark was gone, the glory is gone too. And so you have David here, and he wants to bring the ark back to the people. He wants to bring it back to his capital, and it's symbolic of like, yes, the glory left, the glory was gone, but now the glory is coming back. It's sort of symbolic for him as a king. Now that he's in charge, the glory is going to return. Make Israel great again. I don't know. But thank you for that chuckle, Ty. No, it's like, it's this moment where he's trying to return something, but it's been a difficult journey to get it there. And finally, after some stops and some starts and some trouble, he actually gets the ark to Jerusalem. And this is the moment where Michael's story reaches a climax. And like I said before, it's a tragic climax when we look at it. I think it's relatable. And I also think that as we've seen that there's a deeper character here than just this moment. And I want to say that. In 2 Samuel chapter 5, it says this: So David went and brought the ark of God up from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with joy. And so it was that when those carrying the ark of the Lord marched 6 paces, he sacrificed an ox and a fattened steer. And David was dancing before the Lord with all his strength. And he was wearing a linen ephod, which was kind of the garment of the priests, but it was a thin linen cloth. And so David and all the house of Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with joyful shouting and the sound of the trumpet. And then it happened, as the ark of the Lord was coming into the city of David. You can imagine this. It's like a parade, It's a celebration. It's this moment. The glory is returning, and David is so excited about it. He's dancing, and he's jumping, and he's wearing this not kingly robe, this kind of thin priest's robe. And it happened as the ark of the Lord was coming into the city that Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked down through the window, and she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord. And she was contemptuous of him in her heart. Now, many translations say she despised him in her heart. She was filled with contempt. She sees David dancing and jumping and celebrating, and she despises him in her heart. And this is kind of that movement, right? That we're told over and over that she loved David. There was love in her heart for David. And yet somehow, from that point to this point, the love has been shifted, and now she despises him. She's offended by his behavior. And if we're trying to guess at why that is, I don't know. I have some ideas. I'm going to share some of them with you. We've already mentioned that she was sort of ripped away from her life that she had established apart from David, and perhaps she never recovered. Maybe their relationship was never the same. I don't know. But there's a few observations I think that we can make from this story, and especially in the context of offense. And I think it's helpful because offense is something that all of us will experience in our life. There's a verse that often is quoted. I don't know if it's misquoted, but Jesus says it's inevitable that offenses will come. And I think he's talking about something a little bit different, but I'm like, yeah, it kind of works both ways. Like, it's kind of inevitable that offenses will come. If you go through this life, unless you live on a mountaintop all alone with nobody around you and you can somehow do that and survive, you're going to interact with people. And as we interact with each other, there will be moments of offense. I said this before, but I don't preach this thinking someone out there needs this. Hopefully, you'll be able to identify that in yourself. But I know I need this. Because life and being with people and being married and having children and going to work, and all of these things create so many opportunities for offense. But one of the observations here that I want to make, I call the balcony of offense. Because if you notice where Michael is sitting, now, there is nothing but love for me for all of my balcony sitters. Okay, so but if you notice where Michael is sitting in this story, she's not part of the celebration. She's not down in the parade. She's not excited about the glory returning. She's not participating. She's sitting in the balcony and she's looking down on the proceedings. When I was a young man, fresh out of high school, I went to a ministry school, and it wasn't like a normal ministry school. And so part of what we did was we traveled around, and we kind of, as we were like learning and doing classes and things, we're also like traveling to different churches and kind of ministering in different settings. And as we're doing that, the thing, if you have a teenager, if you've ever had a teenager, or maybe if you ever were a teenager, you might know what I'm talking about. But teenagers, they're pretty good at being offended. You don't have to try very hard to offend your teenage child. And I was the same way as a kid, right? And even just in general, there's sort of this thing that they call teenage angst. If anybody remembers listening to, hard, heavy music and just being mad at the world a little bit, teenage angst. And I had a pretty bad case of it, and teenage angst kind of like starts with this idea that, the world's just kind of against you, man, And there's a lot of self-pitying lyrics and stuff in a lot of the music that I listened to in that time. And like, I just kind of carried that. Like somehow the world had done something to me, but really it hadn't. I was just like, but you have all these reasons why you think, things are stacked against you. And I remember this one moment, we were on this trip and we were on the bus together, and I was sort of like, it was my habit to sort of find a spot by myself on the bus, and I would put on my headphones and I'd put on my angsty music, and I would just kind of be like, yeah, like maybe some of you have experienced that feeling. And I remember being in my corner on the bus, and suddenly it was just like God told me to look up and to open my eyes. And I looked up and I saw, my music is so loud, I can't hear anything. But I see like people interacting, laughing, playing cards together, talking. And it was like God said to me, the only person that's keeping you from being a part of that and experiencing that is you. My balcony of offense had me separating myself from the group, had me, ruminating on my own thoughts and my own angst and my own feelings of being done wrong in life, in the world. And all of a sudden, it was like God said, like, you can join the celebration. You can be a part of that. And I took off my headphones, because sometimes I'm obedient right away. Like, not always. Like, sometimes it takes a long time too, especially with offense. But like, I took my headphones off, and I put my, all right, this is going to date me, my Discman away. Parents, you can explain what that is to your children after the service, but it's how we listen to music before MP3 players. But I put it away, and I was like, and I joined the group. And suddenly, all of the things that were available, nobody made Michael stand up in the window and look down on the proceedings. She could have joined, but she chose not to. It's something about offense that has the power to remove us from joyful participation and to put us on the metaphorical balcony instead of joining the party. It goes on to say, now they brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent which David had pitched for it. And David, because he's so excited, he offers burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And when David had finished offering the burnt offering and the peace offering, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of armies. Further, he distributed to all the people, to all the multitude of Israel, both men and women, a cake of bread, one of dates, and one of raisins to each one. Then he left the people each to his house. So David gave everyone donuts. It was that kind of a day, you know? And then he's like, all right, you get the rest of the day off. Go home. But when David returned to bless his own household, Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David. And here you can see what's been brewing under the surface. And said, how the king of Israel dignified himself today. Sometimes it's hard to read sarcasm in text, but it's not in this case. For he exposed himself today in the sight of his servants, female slaves, as one of the rabble shamelessly exposes himself. There's something about David's clothes that she didn't think was particularly appropriate. And also about his behavior. The fact that he was dancing and, in her estimation, made a fool out of himself. And this kind of shows another side of offense, that offense is dangerous because it can lead to bitterness. Our cat is a tomcat, and he acts like one, and so he comes home all the time with just pieces of flesh missing, you know? And you're just like, what happened to you? Who did this? Because your face is falling off. And it happened just a while ago, like probably 3 weeks ago. He came back and he had this huge chunk out of his cheek. And, we kind of looked at it. It didn't look too bad, but we kind of tried to clean it up a little bit. But about a day later, it was almost no time at all, he walked into the house and the whole side of his head was just oozing. It was like pink, but kind of like, it wasn't clear. It was like pussy and pink. And it was just all down his face. And very quickly, like, one little thing had turned into an infection. And this is sort of how offense can work, is that sometimes it gets infected if it doesn't get healed. And when I look at this moment from Michal, I don't see somebody who's just like popping off. I see a moment that she's probably been carrying for a long time. This wasn't just, how dare you dance in the street. This was more than that. And I think it's fair to say that all of us sort of carry our past with us. And our past can be a source that, if unhealed, can be accessed in these moments of offense. There's this particular story that I want to read to you because it's sort of obscure, but I think it sort of demonstrates why this moment may have, and I say may have, I wasn't there, I don't know, couldn't ask Michal, but may have triggered her so much. Right before David escaped from Saul, when he was still serving Saul, and Saul had made a couple attempts on his life, David realized that he was in danger and he needed to flee, and Saul sent people to his house to collect him. And of course, his house was the house that he shared with Michal. And Michal actually learned about the plot and helped David escape. In fact, she does the old Ferris Bueller's Day Off trick. She takes, like, they say, one of their household idols and puts it in the bed with some straw, and covers it up to make it look like there's somebody sleeping there. And she tells the guards, like, oh, David would come with you, but he's really sick right now. And I don't know why the guards took this story, but they did. And so they leave, and Saul is basically like, what are you doing? Go back and get him. But in the meantime, Michal helps him escape. And it says this in 1 Samuel 19, that so David fled and escaped and came to Samuel. Remember, Samuel's the prophet that anointed him, and informed him of everything that Saul had done. And he and Samuel went and stayed at Naioth. But it was reported to Saul, saying, behold, David is at Naioth in Ramah. And then Saul sent messengers to take David. But when they saw the company of the prophets prophesying, and Samuel standing and prophesying over them, the Spirit of God came upon the messengers of Saul. So Saul sends these guys like, go get David. And when they show up, all the prophets are prophesying, and they're sort of like taken in by the Spirit of God in the moment, and they start prophesying too. And so now they're not, like, they can't arrest him because they're all prophesying. And this is a weird story, I know. And when Saul was informed of this, so news gets back to Saul. He's like, yeah, they all just couldn't arrest him. They all started prophesying. Then Saul sent other messengers, but they also prophesied. And so Saul sent messengers again the third time, and they prophesied. And then he went to Ramah himself. You know, this is kind of like when you send your kids to do a chore. You know, you send one, and it's like, they don't do it. You're like, hey, go help your brother and get it done. And they don't do it. Then you send them all. Like, surely you could all do it. And then eventually you realize it's not getting done, and so you just go do it yourself, right? So Saul is like, I'll take care of this then. He went to Ramah himself and came as far as the large well that is in Seku. And he asked, where are Samuel and David? And someone said, behold, they are at Naioth in Ramah. So he proceeded there to Naioth in Ramah, but the Spirit of God came upon him also. So he went along prophesying continually until he came to Naioth in Ramah. So Saul shows up, and he can't even make it there without starting to also prophesy. But this is what happened after this. And again, I don't know, I'm guessing, but I wonder if this is a moment that Michal remembered. Because Saul, it says in verse 24, he also stripped off his clothes. Think about this. The king of Israel, the most respected, revered man in the entire land, starts prophesying and strips naked. It says he too prophesied before Samuel and lay down naked all that day and all that night. It's kind of an embarrassing story, especially for the king. And also probably for the king's family. In fact, this wasn't like something, you know, sometimes you have this embarrassing moment and you're like, I hope nobody saw that. And nobody did, and you kind of, or maybe one person did, and you're like, hey, you know, just between us, let's not talk about it. But this wasn't one of those moments. This got out. Everybody found out about this. In fact, there was like a catchphrase that people would say. It says, therefore they say, is Saul also among the prophets? And this was sort of like, it became like a joke, like a national joke. Remember that time Saul stripped his clothes off and started prophesying? Isn't Saul among the prophets? And I wonder if in this moment when Michal is looking at David, behaving the way he's behaving, if she wasn't reminded of the embarrassment of her father in a similar situation. I wonder if David's free-spirited worship brought this to Michal's mind. If it brought up the pain and the embarrassment of seeing her own father become a catchphrase. But the truth is, for all of us, that if our past is left undealt with, it can grow into an infection of the soul. And I had to think about this while I prepared, because I've had my moments. And offense is such a tricky thing, because for all of the moments that I've had, I've also participated in moments that hurt other people. And many times for me, The people that I've wounded the most were people that were dear to me. People that were other people of God. And at the same time, many of the wounds that I carry came from people that were dear to me. And people who were people of God. And I had to take a moment this week and think back, because when there's moments like that that are marked, and you may have them too, even from years and years and years ago, but I know the names, you know? And I had to stop and sit with that and go, how is, like, have I released them? Is my heart clear toward them? Because even though I'll never forget the names, I'll never forget the faces, I'll never forget the things that were said or done, I also know that I don't want it to go with me. And I'm sure that you've been hurt too. And honestly, one of the biggest things that I want to say is that if you've been hurt by people in church, if you've been hurt by the church, if you've been hurt by church leaders, I want to just tell you that I'm sorry. And as one, I'm sorry for the times that I have caused pain and that I have created opportunities for offense. Psalm 19, part of David's son Solomon, who was, revered as the wisest man to ever live. But he said this: a person's wisdom has made him slow to anger, and it is his glory to overlook an offense. I think that speaks so well that there's a glory in us walking in grace toward one another, being able to overlook an offense. In Psalm 12, actually I think this is Proverbs 12. I don't know if I put it in wrong, but maybe it's not. Maybe it is in Psalms. Whew. It says, a fool's annoyance is known at once, but the prudent overlook an insult. There's some offenses that are easy to overlook, right? I participate in the Bitterroot 500 several times a week, which means that I get flipped off a couple times a year. I'm going to be honest. My driving is not appreciated by everyone, and they're probably right sometimes. Okay, so, but here's the thing, it's pretty, it feels offensive. A couple months ago, I was with Rio in the car, and we were, it was like one of those intersections where there's not a stop sign in town. You know the ones I'm talking about, where you kind of one street looks more like a through street, but it's not really obvious. Well, it turns out there was a stop sign. And I had stopped at the stop sign. But as sometimes you do, you check both ways, and you're like, oh, it was clear. But by the time you start going and you look back, it's not clear anymore. And so I had, stopped in the proper spot. And then as I pulled out, I saw there's somebody coming. Now, I'm not in the middle of the street here, you guys. Nobody had to swerve to avoid me. I stopped quickly. Oh, whoops, stopped quickly. This guy drives through the intersection and just lets me have it, because I almost didn't, I almost pulled out in front of him, but I didn't. And I remember that moment feeling like that was a really, sometimes I deserve it, I know, I'll admit it, but that one didn't feel right, And so I turned to follow him, and I had a little bit of rage going on, And as I'm following behind him. I'm thinking like, I'm going to memorize this license plate number. I'm going to find where this guy, no, I'm kidding. I didn't go that diabolical. But I did like think, why am I following him? What am I going to do? Like, I'm not going to like confront this guy. And he wasn't going the direction I needed to go anyway. So I turned off and went the other way. And I still felt it when I got home, you know, like I was wound up a little bit. But like an offense like that, a day later, you don't feel it. Right now, while I'm telling you the story, I don't feel it. Because sometimes it's easy to overlook. But there are some that don't feel easy to overlook. And it's why I wanted to provide some of Michael's story for you to show you that I don't think she was just weak because of this moment. That her life had given her a lot of things that would be hard to just overlook. And so as we're just starting to wind down a little bit, the question that I was thinking about as I was thinking about this was, is it growing or is it going? You know, because like the traffic thing, it's like, it's going. Like, I feel a little bit hurt in the moment, but then I'm over it. I'm gone. But sometimes like a week later, it's not going. And a month later, it's not going. It's growing. And I think this is a good moment for us to realize that this is, when we become aware of that's sort of the warning light. That's sort of the siren to say, you know what? What do I need to do to take care of this before it becomes something that I don't want in my life? And so I just wrote down a couple ideas. And honestly, there's probably more out there. But sometimes confession, just talking to someone, hey, I'm feeling this way. I know my wife can help me in that area because sometimes things feel like a big deal to me, and then she's like, it's not that big of a deal. You should probably get over it. I'm like, okay, yeah, you're right. And sometimes that's all it needs. It just needs to be sort of like, hey, this happened, and I'm feeling this way, and it's not with you, but can you just hear me? I honestly think like therapy is great, right? Because we talked about how so many times offense is rooted in something that may not even be the thing. It might be way before the thing. And I've had those moments in my life when I'm like, why does that make me so angry? Why does that make me react so strongly? But it's because it's triggering something that is stuck in there from when I was a kid or from years and years ago. And therapy can be a beautiful way to find that and to heal it. And the Bible offers us another solution, which is obviously reconciliation, which is difficult, and it probably needs to be handled with care, and it probably needs to be at the appropriate time, because it can easily work against you if you're not ready. But ultimately, I think God wants us all to be reconciled to each other. You know, I said maybe this moment had something to do with Michael's father, and I don't know if David was thinking that too, but David gives one of those speeches that, like, there's parts of it that I'm like, oh yeah, and then there's parts of it that I'm like, that would not have gone well with my wife. But he says to Michael, I was before the Lord, right? Because she's calling him out. What were you doing down there making a fool out of yourself? And he's like, I was before the Lord. And then he kind of takes a dig, right? Who preferred me to your father and to all his house, to appoint me as ruler over the people of the Lord, over Israel. So like that, I mean, I feel like that's like not fair, David. You kind of low blow. But he says, so I will celebrate before the Lord. And I might demean myself even more than this, and will be lowly in my own sight. This is that, famous verse, I'll become even more undignified. Like, you think I look like a fool? I'll go even harder next time, He's sort of like, But he says, but with the female slaves whom you have spoken, with them I am to be held in honor. And there's something beautiful there that, like, when we do abandon our own sense of pride to give ourselves to God, that there are people who will look at it and it will look foolish. But at the same time, it also creates this, like with the right people, they'll honor it. And then there's the most tragic verse in this whole story. It says, and Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child to the day of her death. Now, this was a common thing to associate like sort of judgment with something going on. And we know that Jesus corrected that in the New Testament. Why was this man born blind? Was it his sin? Was it his parents' sin? Did his grandparents sin? What caused this? And Jesus is like, that's not it at all. You're missing it. But it seems like the writers here are connecting this moment of barrenness to Michal's bitterness. And I want to say this because I have, throughout my time in churches, I've met women who longed to have a child but were unable. It's not because of bitterness in your life, okay? It's not. That's not it. And it's not judgment. And God sees you, and he's tender towards you. But I do want to say that there is a barrenness that it can be a condition of the soul. And I think you see throughout Scripture, there's like an intensity with which these women in the Bible who are barren want to have children. And you can see it in almost every story where you see that, there's a desperation almost for them to have a child. And in some cases, God heals them and they're able to have children. And in some cases like this one, we see that they're not. And in that time, I think, your purpose and almost your identity as a woman was to bear children and to have a family. And so they mourned the loss of their identity, the loss of their purpose. And these women felt like they were fruitless if they didn't have children. And I think there's a connection maybe to like the way that bitterness can strike at our purpose and it can strike at our fruitfulness. David was willing to look foolish in front of everyone in order to worship God. Yeah, I just want to leave it there for a minute. That this is like each of us in our hearts, there's a temptation to hold on to things. And if I could say anything to you today, it would just be that God wants to work in that area. And it's probably a journey. It's probably something that takes time to find healing and to come into wholeness. And I've had things that I thought I released, and then something happens and it triggers it, and I'm like, oh, it's still there. It's still there. I thought it was gone. And that's okay. This isn't a call to sweep things under the rug. This is a call to let God work in all of our lives to bring greater fruitfulness, to realign ourselves and our purpose, and for it to be beautiful. So I want to close with prayer, and then we have kind of a heavy announcement, and we're going to do that after after this, but if you would just pray with me and just make this a moment with Jesus. Because Lord, I know, man, there's been things in me that I didn't even see until I saw it. But there's also things that I knew, and I just want my heart to be open before you. And I ask that each of us would have that posture. Like David said, search us and know us, God. See where these things are sitting under the surface. See where these things, where we want to let go, but we can't. And God, I ask that you would lead us in your way everlasting. That you would show us the right steps to take to release the things that we need to release. And God, I thank you that you are drawing this church and you're drawing us each as individuals toward greater fruitfulness. And I just ask that anything in our hearts that's stuck there, you would deal with so that we can move into that fruitfulness. Thank you for that in Jesus' name. Amen.